delegates, and thank you also to the organisers for a wonderfully organised event. Thank you. My paper today represents a sketch of ways for thinking about and researching cosmopolitanism. It doesn't so much address public policy dimensions and the possibilities of cosmopolitanism, but you might see some potential in the things I say, things I talk about. But my research has essentially been around understanding cosmopolitanism as something which may or may not exist in real-world settings. So I'm a sociologist, and I use a variety of empirical research, qualitative and quantitative, as well as make various types of theoretical interventions in the field. The paper then is a sketch, I think, of my work, mostly with Zlatko Skribic in the last 10 years, and also with Gavin Kendall, about the ways in which we can think about what cosmopolitanism is, what it isn't, and how it might work for us. For all of its promise, idealism, and capacity to engender excitement, cosmopolitanism is to sociologists what the Higgs boson particle is to physicists. The fact that scientists can simulate and visualise the existence of this elementary particle actually puts them a step ahead of scholars of cosmopolitanism who claim to see it everywhere but can never agree on what they're actually seeing. So in the short presentation, I can't show you the cosmopolitan particle, but I offer you a guide to how you can go about finding it and the pitfalls of the various methodologies you might use along the way. The rationale for the paper, I guess, is this idea about conceptualising. The point of it is that we need to be clear about the best way to define and understand the concept to get the most out of it. And the progression of ideas in the paper actually represents something of a potted history of the work that I've done over the last 10 years on cosmopolitanism. Anyway, that will be revealed as the paper progresses. I thought it best to offer a definition, or at least one that might suffice for the moment. In its contemporary meaning, cosmopolitanism refers to, tried to condense this as much as well as I can, openness to the other and cultural difference. It also refers to an expanded sense of belonging, crucially, which doesn't necessarily abandon localness or the idea and the influence of the nation state, but now looks to the field of humanity as a way of framing social action. As an ethical stance, it relies on particular practices which seek to connect and engage in various types of dialogue with the other and with cultural difference. Having given a definition, we can identify at least four main strands in literature on cosmopolitanism, and these strands make it a genuinely ambitious and challenging concept that works across the social sciences, but the scope of the concept also represents some problems for researchers in the field. The definition was based on, or paraphrased, I guess, from the work with Gavin Kendall and Zlatko Skribic in 2009 on the sociology of cosmopolitanism in a book published by Palgrave. Let me talk about these four dimensions. Firstly, because we need to be clear about which dimension I guess I want to talk about and which dimension my research expertise rests in. Firstly, cosmopolitanism has a political dimension. There's an explicit commitment which encourages people to appreciate and to recognise difference, including their own, and embed their politics in universal principles, committing themselves to the dethronement of their own unique cultural identity. This dimension extends into institutional and global domains when cosmopolitan political commitments aim beyond the local in particular and morph into institutionally committed cosmopolitan principles. At this global or regional level, cosmopolitanism refers to an ambition or project of supranational state building, including regimes of global government, the governance and legal institutional frameworks for regulating events and processes which reach beyond any one nation. There's also an ethical dimension to cosmopolitanism, and at its core, it's defined by an inclusive ethical core that emphasises worldliness, which I note is the key word in the logo of Deakin. As far as I can tell, it seems to be branded all over the university, which is not necessarily a bad thing. hospitality and communitarianism. There's also a methodological argument in the literatures on cosmopolitanism that have arisen in the last 10 to 20 years. I guess it's associated particularly with Ulrich Beck's work on methodological nationalism or methodological cosmopolitanism. This is a grander argument about how sociology in particular should improve itself and change, I guess, via the incorporation of particular methodologies, particular approaches, which go beyond the nation, which encourage scholars to look for fluidity, for mobility, for relationality, and to incorporate the local with the national and with the global. At its core, it's not necessarily a rejection of the nation-state's importance and relevance, but an embrace of a post-national and transnational perspective in understanding the forces of globality in relation to national and local settings. Fourthly, and this is the one I guess I need to dwell on today, the cultural dimensions of cosmopolitanism. Perhaps the most basic cultural building block that cosmopolitans share is a disposition of openness to the world around them. However vague, however trite, however general, there is little doubt that a disposition of openness is a basic philosophical posture underpinning cosmopolitanism, and also it continues to be a basic dispositional characteristic that most theorists of cosmopolitanism continue to assert. Some of my research with LACGO has been about interrogating what this openness is empirically and trying to understand it and trying to understand its limitations, its possibilities, its inclusivities as well as its closures. These four dimensions of cosmopolitanism are closely intertwined and can be distinguished for thinking purposes only, I guess, heuristic purposes. In practice, they are largely inseparable, but it's precisely this complex coexistence which makes cosmopolitanism an exciting sociological project. And the accent here is on cosmopolitanism as a particular type of project. I wanted to just be clear about what cosmopolitanism is and what it isn't, at least in terms of my thinking. It is an ideal, okay, cosmopolitan as a particular type of political and ethical ideal, but it is also a real-world social process whereby there's this, there becomes a institutionalized, recursive process whereby the global comes to influence the local. This is the process of cosmopolitanization, and it's necessarily different, but related to the idea of cosmopolitanism as a political and ethical ideal. I guess sociologists have, like myself, have focused more on this process of cosmopolitanization. Globalization does not guarantee cosmopolitan culture. What cosmopolitanism supposedly introduces is a set of globally oriented ethical principles and political practices. Literatures on globalization classically have tended to be around the economic and integrated processes associated with the move toward the global, but I think cosmopolitanism tries to add on in a useful way ethics, political practices, and identity relationships to these established bodies of literature on globalization. Cosmopolitan society is not a given. It's best seen as a process and a project, so no one's suggesting that that we live in a cosmopolitan culture, but a culture or a society which is cosmopolitanizing, I guess. So it's a project. It's not about the replacement of the nation state or local things, but their incorporation. And it's not here to save the world. We need hard-headed, intelligent, incisive analysis from various types of social science disciplines, I guess. Though cosmopolitanism promises and represents social hope, transformation, and revitalization, which may well significantly improve the world. Well, these points are up for debate. Okay, I wanted to, in the body of the paper, talk about three different ways of conceptualizing cultural approaches to understanding cosmopolitanism. And as I said, this progression of ideas represents the way in which my own research, mostly with LACGO, has progressed in terms of how it gives attention to what cosmopolitanism is. First of all, we can think about cosmopolitanism as a disposition. And typically, if we use the existing literatures on cosmopolitanism to discern the key threads of cosmopolitanism as a disposition, then openness comes up as the major component of this disposition. But there are three, perhaps, dimensions of this openness. First, there is a dimension related to mobilities, corporeal, virtual, and imaginative. So the capacity for these types of mobilities is an important way, it's argued, of cultivating and solidifying, manifesting the cosmopolitan imagination. The second element of this disposition of openness is various types of cultural symbolic competencies that allow people to move across and within various different cultural life worlds. Some authors coming from linguistics, particularly and class studies of linguistics, emphasise this as a cosmopolitan skill of code switching. So essentially we take this to refer to an individual's ability to know, command, and enact a variety of cultural knowledges and skills, to switch cultural codes as required as part of cultivating a sense of intercultural mastery. This is also a type of folk knowledge of global society, which allows people to get on in different contexts. The third dimension of cosmopolitanism openness relates to the inclusive valuing of other cultural forms whose origin is outside one's home culture. The cosmopolitan citizen must be receptive to the cultural outputs of others and indeed be willing to be engaged with them. This involves a conscious attempt to be of familiarity with people, objects, and places outside local and national settings. The consciousness of tourists might be the first thing that comes to mind here as a step toward this direction, provided it's not preoccupied with the comforts and safeties of home. A degree of reflexivity and reflexive engagement, however, is inevitably required to move into the realm of cosmopolitan vision and social action. The problem with okay, let me present some tables. Why not? But this comes from a paper I published with Zlatko Skribish and Clive Bean a couple of years ago in the British Journal of Sociology. And essentially what we did was we tried to devise a series of cosmopolitan questions and scales which we had inserted into the Australian election study back in the mid-2000s. And we tried to essentially operationalise cosmopolitanism. And we started with this Bourdieusian idea, I guess, of cosmopolitan as a particular type of disposition. I mean, it's interesting to ponder some of the intricacies of the data and also some of the problems with measurements that were utilised. I mean, the first question there I think is interesting. To what extent do people agree with or not agree with the statement that I am a citizen of the world as well as an Australian citizen? And you can see that if you, in offering this space for people to make an agreement about multiple forms of identity, association and belonging, that roughly 2/3 of people agree that they're Australian and a citizen of the world. Problem I think with our question, but it depends how you ask this question. In other studies, people force a choice. Okay, say, which domain do you belong to? Which one do you feel most strongly associated and affiliated with? The local, the national, or the global? Well, 10% of people pick global. All right, but once I guess you allow people an opportunity to have this idea that, okay, I'm an Australian and a global citizen, then we find roughly 2/3 in quite broad agreement about that this is a particular ideal that I would like. This is potentially promising. We ask also some harder questions, but let me get to those. Well, again, you should look at the paper. I guess this is more encouragement to go and read the paper. But what essentially we found in trying to map out the elements of the cosmopolitan disposition was that well, there wasn't actually one disposition. There were various types of structures which make up this disposition, and we can't think about cosmopolitanism as a particular disposition, whole completed in a whole completed form. For certain elements of the cosmopolitan agenda, there was strong agreement. Elements basically around questions of personal choice and personal consumption, and this capacity for movement, to engage through travel, through food, through TV, the cultural byproducts of globality, people were very enthusiastic about. But when it came to questions, particularly on the national economy, there was much resistance, or there was stronger resistance, and there were blockages. So that we noticed there was a particular sort of falling away of this commitment to this ideal of the global society, especially when people were prompted to think about, well, actually, what might it do to Australian jobs? What might it do to Australian culture? What might it do to to the job situation in Australia? There's more blockages. There's more resistances. This was played out according to demographic lines. Young people, people on higher incomes, people who lived in urban settings, people who do or don't attend church, women. These were all various types of salient predictors of the cosmopolitan disposition. But what the problem is with this notion about cosmopolitan as a disposition is that there is not just one thing that makes up the disposition. The disposition of cosmopolitanism is actually made up of a series of different agendas, I guess, and different parcels: cultural, economic, identity, political, and so on. People along various types of lines of social cleavage are willing to accept some and less willing to accept others, and there's a corrosion of the cosmopolitan identification when the harder factors are introduced. What's it going to do to Australian culture? What's it going to do to the Australian economy? I like it when it's about me, but when it gets tougher, we found that the sentiment of cosmopolitanism corroded. And essentially we found the disposition was fragmented. So there's not just one disposition, but there are various empirical components that make it up. It's also context dependent, we gestured. So dispositions are sometimes evident and other times not. They are flexible, not fixed. And I guess this is one problem with the concept of disposition, and this comes from its heritage in studies of Bourdieu, is that there's a sense in which the disposition is built up by various historical and educational legacies, class legacies, and so on, and it remains relatively fixed, relatively hard for people to break free of. It also suggests this emphasis on cosmopolitanism as a disposition, that some people have it and some people don't. And what we found was that there was often broad agreement about it as an ideal. Wow. While there was broad agreement about it as a particular type of ideal, this ideal wasn't resistant. Okay, wasn't necessarily enduring and resistant when other hard factors were introduced. Let me skip the data. You can check it out at another time. But we sum it up here. The pattern seems to suggest robust support for certain elements of the agenda, particularly based around consumption, sampling, the promotion of rights for people and the environment. Yet this support is tempered by stronger feelings of national interest on matters related to the economy, on how globalisation and a cosmopolitan agenda might impact negatively on living standards and protection of local culture. Okay, we then, in later research, we took a more qualitative approach. We turned to think about cosmopolitanism as a particular type of repertoire. We gave up on the social survey, which has its own advantages, and we moved toward thinking about cosmopolitan as a repertoire, I think, which is a more productive way of doing it. Here, and I'm going to summarise with limited time, here we can think about cosmopolitanism as a set of skills, I guess. Cultural capital, yes, but more complex than that. A way of managing situations, a way of demonstrating civility, of showing respect, of accomplishing the emergent needs of situations where intercultural skills are demanded. And Sweidler's idea of the toolkit in cultural sociology as culture as an assemblage of particular types of tools is an influence here that you could follow up on. Another interesting idea in this emphasis on repertoires is, again, coming out of class studies of language, and Bernstein's work is this emphasis on cosmopolitanism as a set of elaborated cultural codes rather than a set of restricted cultural codes. Anyway, and in this paper that we published in SOC Review I don't know, about 3 or 4 years ago, essentially we plotted the dynamics of these repertoires and the way in which people were able to open themselves up to the global and to embrace certain types of cosmopolitan ideals. And we also plotted the ways, the discourses, the frames, and the situations in which people were prompted to close them down. So cosmopolitanism does not exist. Cosmopolitan exists within certain social structures, I guess, was one of the points that the strong points that we made. And we also made the point that was somewhat of a strategic set of resources. So people bought them out when they were necessary, when they gave certain advantages, and retracted them, put them back. Okay, depending on the situation. Well, okay, so this is research that's been done in the past. I think, but the next phase of cosmopolitanism research, at least for me, moves toward what we might call cosmoscapes, encounters, and canopies. The emphasis on the disposition is fine. The emphasis on the repertoire is useful. But let's move toward looking at cosmopolitanism in the context of certain types of spaces, times, and settings. The American sociologist, if you know his work, Elijah Anderson, fantastic ethnographer of urban life in America, race and urban life in America, has come up with this a great book just published last year called The Cosmopolitan Canopy. And basically Anderson, based on his rich sort of ethnographic work, demonstrates that particular parts of cities and towns facilitate or organise for social rituals and routines which allow mixing to become normal. In canopy spaces, people actively monitor and reproduce cosmopolitan mixing. Okay, and he found that that these encounters within these spaces with people, with places, and with things, foods, for example, that are culturally different, become the building blocks of cosmopolitan society. The question is, why do some encounters work to build this civil sphere, and why do others corrode it? A quote from Anderson, and I haven't got the answer to that question, but I guess what I'm arguing for here is an agenda in cosmopolitanism research. I guess also it links with some existing work in everyday multiculturalism, studies of everyday multiculturalism, which look to the situated, the contextualised, and the geographic spatial dimensions by which it is organised and through which people are allowed to act in cosmopolitan ways. And this then becomes a self-reproducing set of social relations. At least this is what Anderson says. Within these canopies, people practice an idealised form of cosmopolitanism. They accept it. They repeat it. They go back repeatedly for these types of experiences where they talk to and deal with strangers. And he says over time they may develop a level of comfort with those who are different from themselves. The canopy offers the promise of edification for all who enter. Exposure to others' humanity generates empathy, fears dissipate, and grounds for mutual appreciation disappear. I will stop there, having outlined those three approaches.
All right, thank you. All right. If you haven't done already, I forgot to mention that introduce yourself before you ask the question. So if you haven't done already, please do so. Val.
My background has not been in multicultural studies. Okay, I came to cosmopolitanism studies through working with Zlatko and originally Gavin Kendall. That was actually the strength of our approach, I guess. Gavin was for coding, working in technology studies and so on. Zlatko was into ethnicity, racial studies and belonging. My work had been in culture, cultural consumption, cultural action. So I didn't come to cosmopolitanism from that background of multicultural studies. In fact, I had somewhat avoided that, I guess, as a topic because I felt, for me, back when I was starting, I guess, and working on a PhD and just beyond the PhD, that it wasn't that was in a realm of public policy engagement that I didn't want to get involved in. This is what was attractive about cosmopolitanism, that it somehow moved beyond, or it promised at least to move beyond certain old debates. Whether it does or not, I don't know. I mean, the argument is that cosmopolitanism becomes, I guess, a way for thinking about social change, a way for thinking about contemporary societies, which are influenced by processes of globalisation. Multiculturalism, traditionally, I guess, has been associated with policy, with particular types of civil societies, institutions, and so on. And I mean, that's my understanding of it. However, there is a lot of interesting work in the field of everyday multiculturalism, I think, which is useful. And I mean, as far as I can tell, it's similar to the type of work I'm proposing here.
I was the first speaker.
Yeah.
My introduction. Do you see, Ian, any connection, relation between your work, your ideas on cosmopolitanism concept, and the liberal idea of individual autonomy? So this idea that individuals are open to the world, that it's based on rational self-direction. You use your critical faculties in trying to orientate and negotiate the world. Do you see any?
I mean, this is the critical and the problematic aspect, I guess. That this is the thing that people pinpoint, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, there is an instrumental reason for becoming cosmopolitan, right? So that this fits with this neoliberal ethos of mobility, of having the skills to negotiate the global world, and so on. Yeah, I think this is a potential critique of it, a potential problem with it, but I don't think it necessarily applies in every case. I think there are sort of elite forms of cosmopolitanism. There are highly mobile transnational workers and so on who embody this sort of ideal of the elite cosmopolitan. But there are also other types of cosmopolitanism, working class cosmopolitanism, for example, whereby these skills just become important and crucial and useful ways of getting on in the world. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes these skills are put to use by highly skilled, educated, global business people and so on, but other times they're used within working class settings. So the potential for it to go both ways, I think, exists. I think this is a problem. I don't shy away from it. It is a problem with the concept of cosmopolitanism, that it does offer this sort of neoliberal individualized identity to some degree. But I don't think empirically it's a bit more complex than that. But I appreciate the concern.
Jessica Walter from the McCaffrey Center at LBU. I was just wondering if you could speak to how cosmopolitanism plays out in everyday encounters, and if someone who sees himself as like a citizen of the world, if that intersects with notions of colorblindness and being also post-racial or strive to be so-called post-racial, and if that's something that cosmopolitanism sort of strives for in everyday encounters.
It's a good question, and I'm not sure whether I can answer it straight up. But I think the concept, again, looking at cosmopolitanism from quite a critical angle, it's relatively, I guess, has somewhat disengaged from questions of race and colour. And this is a potential problem with those literatures, and there is an obsession to some degree with questions of mobility, with questions of fluidity, with the ability to crisscross cultural spaces and identities of various forms. This is a potential angle of criticism for the concept. Having said that, I mean, it just depends on on how you approach it. I mean, Anderson's book that I mentioned 3/4 through the talk, Anderson is really someone who engages very directly with questions of race and skin colour in American culture, and he's doing it through this cosmopolitan framework. So it is possible.
Yannick Thurwell from the House of Multicultural Affairs and Citizenship. Thanks for that. That was great. I'm just wondering, how does the selective application of cosmopolitanism that you've kind of identified here affect its definition of an ethical stance? It seemed to me that you posit this as kind of the foes and hates version, and I guess the holy grail of that is some kind of imperative, and
you're right. This is the key question. I think this is one of the key questions in cosmopolitan research, is that how do the everyday behaviours, the everyday practices, and mostly from the data I showed, people were enthusiastic about travel, about food, about going to exciting parts of the city where there were people who were different but also friendly and so on. How and under what circumstances and what, if all, does that matter? Or is it just simply a sort of a form of cultural appropriation whereby people upskill themselves according to this neoliberal sort of version, and then fly away, so to speak, in a cosmopolitan vein. So this question of how these everyday behaviours do or don't translate is crucial, I think, and is the question, or one of the questions in cosmopolitanism studies. And I think that's why the canopy idea is also useful, because the canopy idea says that there are these spaces, idealised but also practiced spaces in our cities, whereby people routinely, mundanely, regularly engage in these sorts of cosmopolitan behaviours. And how is it that we can grow those canopies larger, I guess, and to make them have influence in other parts of people's lives or in other parts of the city? So yes, this question about everyday practices and how and if and how, when it translates to ethics is the crucial question. I think it will for some people and it won't for others, and this depends on the frames of interpretation. I mean, Ulf Hannitz talks about cosmopolitanism as a meaning-making process. It involves people actively thinking it up. It involves a particular element of cultural capital, a particular type of habitus, to use Bourdieu's language, to bring it into place. So, this is a tough question. Good question.
Time for one more bit.
I'm Mark Prine from Monash, and I'm really enjoying the talks, all three so far, and yours as well. And I kind of understand and define culture and multiculturalism in very broad terms. And I'm not familiar with the work on cosmopolitanism as you laid it out, but I'm going to give it a good hard think. I'm enjoying the ideas. The comment I have, and would like your thoughts on it, is there was an interesting piece Peter McLaren wrote quite a while ago, but called where he dealt with the topic of the ethnographic flaneur, sort of dipping in and out of cultures. And for me, and he was using it kind of in a positive way, but critiquing it a bit. That might be a radical version of the neoliberal, for-profit version. But that also makes me think of James G's capital D discourses. Like, we all do inhabit multiple identities through language and in other ways that we move in and out of. Do you see those ideas touching on cosmopolitanism at all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, these two elements that you've described certainly issues to be dealt with within these literatures. The ethnographic flaneur idea is particularly useful and particularly interesting. It's about immersion and belonging in particular spaces, but also the ability to step out, to be strange, I guess, to see one's strangeness and the strangeness of others, and to appreciate it, and so on. So yeah, both of those ideas, I think, are part of a cosmopolitan agenda. The second set of ideas I'm not so familiar with, but I guess if it's about plurality and multiplicity of identities and so on, yeah, this broadly fits with it. But it may come from a different heritage, I guess. This sort of questions about postmodern identities might be a different body of literature.
Let's thank Ian.